People love to argue about renting versus buying a home. Everyone thinks their side is the smart one. But once you strip out emotion and ego, there is only one real question. Which choice actually makes more financial sense for you? When you rent, the math is simple. The money you pay your landlord is gone forever. If your rent is $2,000 a month, that is about $24,000 a year, you will never see again. Owning a home, on the other hand, is way more complicated. The total cost of owning a home is not just the mortgage payment. That mortgage payment itself is a mix of interest and principal. And then on top of that, you have extra costs like property taxes, insurance, and maintenance every single year. So if we want to compare renting and buying fairly in a true apples to apples way, we have to answer one key question. In each scenario, how much money will I never get back? That is the heart of this entire video. This framework was originally introduced by Ben Felix, a Canadian portfolio manager on YouTube. His video, Renting versus Buying, the 5% Rule, inspired this one, so full credit to him. But here's the thing. His video came out about 6 years ago. At that time, mortgage rates were much lower. Today, rates have jumped up and now sit in the range of about 7.5% to 8.5% for many people. That is a completely different world. So I felt this topic needed an update for the market that we are actually living in right now. And that is how we get to what I am calling the 8.71% rule. The main thing we are trying to solve for in this video is the real cost of homeownership, converted into a monthly number so that we can compare it directly with rent. Once we have that, we can say, if the monthly cost of owning is lower than renting a similar place, buying might make sense. If the monthly cost of owning is higher, renting might actually be the smarter move. That is the basic logic. Now, Ben's original breakdown said there are three major components of the true cost of owning a home: property taxes, maintenance costs, and the mortgage payment, which we are going to break down into two parts. All of these are costs that renters do not have to deal with. So if you are renting, you can stop right here and smile for a second. But if you are thinking about buying, let us go through each one in detail. First, let us talk about property taxes. If you own a property, you pay property taxes. Not negotiable. That is the price you pay to keep your name on the deed. In very simple terms, property tax means that every year you owe your local government a certain percentage of your home's value. In the United States, the average property tax rate across residential real estate is roughly 1.11% per year. To make the numbers concrete, let us use a nice round example. A home worth $500,000. At a property tax rate of about 1.11%, your yearly property tax bill would be roughly $5,500. That is money that leaves your pocket and never comes back to you. It does not pay down your loan. It does not build your equity. It is just an ongoing cost of being a homeowner. Now, I know a lot of you watching outside the United States. If you are in Canada, Australia, Europe, or somewhere else in the world, do not worry. But for the sake of keeping this video clean and easy to follow, we will stick to our $500,000 example with a 1.11% property tax rate. So, step one, we have about $5,500 per year in property taxes. That is our first non-recoverable cost. The next cost is maintenance. Homes look nice on Instagram, but in real life they break, creak, leak, and fall apart slowly over time. Roofs need to be replaced. Plumbing goes wrong. Appliances die, paint peels, and random things go wrong at the worst possible times. Because of this, many experts suggest that homeowners set aside roughly 1 to 2% of the home's value every year for maintenance. That is not for luxury upgrades or fancy renovations, that is just to keep the home from falling apart. To keep our math simple and conservative, we will use the lower end of that range and assume 1% per year. On our $500,000 home, 1% equals $5,000 per year in maintenance. So now we have about $5,500 per year in property tax plus about $5,000 per year in maintenance. Together, that adds up to around $10,500 per year in costs that you will never get back, which is roughly 2 to a little over 2.1% of the home's value every single year. So far, so good. Now we move to the big one, the mortgage, or what Ben calls the cost of capital. When we talk about the cost of capital, we are really asking, what is the cost of tying my money up in this house instead of doing something else with it? There are two parts to this. The cost of your down payment, the money you put in up front, and the cost of your debt, the interest you pay on the mortgage. Let us assume a classic situation. You put down 20% and finance the rest over 30 years, because that is one of the most common mortgage setups. 20% of $500,000 is $100,000. That means you put $100,000 down in cash and you take out a mortgage on the remaining $400,000. Those are the two moving parts. $100,000 tied up as equity, $400,000 as a loan. Let us start with the opportunity cost of that $100,000 down payment. Opportunity cost is just a fancy way of saying, by choosing one thing, what did I give up? If you put $100,000 into your home as a down payment, that is $100,000 that is not going into the stock market, into an index fund, or into another investment that could be growing for you. Historically, over the last roughly 30 years, the S&P 500 has returned around 7.69% per year on average after adjusting for inflation. Over that same period, median residential real estate prices in the United States have appreciated at around 1.97% per year after inflation. So, very roughly, stocks have outperformed primary residential real estate by about 5% per year. That means if your $100,000 down payment were invested in the stock market instead of sitting in your house, you could expect, on average, about $5,000 plus per year in growth than what you would get from the house itself. That difference, that extra $5,000 you are not earning, is the opportunity cost of your down payment. It is part one of the cost of capital. If you are outside the United States, you can look up your local long-term real estate returns and compare them to your local stock market index. But in many developed countries, the gap between stock returns and primary home appreciation tends to land somewhere between 3 and 5%. So the idea still holds. Your down payment has an opportunity cost. Now let us talk about the second part of the cost of capital, the cost of debt, or simply the interest you pay on your mortgage. To keep things straightforward, let us assume that the interest on the $400,000 loan works out to around $28,000 per year under current mortgage rates. We are simplifying here by taking the loan balance and multiplying it by an approximate interest rate to get a ballpark number. That $28,000 per year is money that goes straight to the bank. It does not stay with you, and it does not increase your equity. It is the price you pay to borrow money. So, adding together the two parts of the cost of capital, about $5,000 per year in opportunity cost on your $100,000 down payment, plus about $28,000 per year in interest on your mortgage. That gives us $33,000 per year in total cost of capital. To express that as a percentage of the home's value, we take $33,000 and divide it by $500,000. That comes out to roughly 6.6% per year. So now we have all three components. Property tax, about 1.11%. Maintenance, about 1%. Cost of capital, about 6.6%. Add them together and we arrive at roughly 8.71%. That is where the 8.71% rule comes from. So how do we actually use this? The rule is, take the price of the home, multiply it by 8.71%, and then divide by 12. The result is your estimated monthly cost of owning that home. Let us plug in a different example to make it real. Suppose the home you are looking at is worth $400,000. We take $400,000, multiply by 8.71%, which gives us roughly $34,320 per year in ownership costs. Then we divide that by 12 months. That leaves us with about $2,903 per month. That is your true monthly cost of owning that $400,000 home once you factor in property tax, maintenance, and the cost of capital. So, if you can rent a similar home in that area for less than $2,903 a month, the math suggests that renting is actually the better deal financially. On the other hand, if rents for a comparable place are higher than that number, buying starts to look more attractive. Now, I know some of you are going to love this rule because it gives you a quick shortcut. Others are going to absolutely hate it because it simplifies a very complex topic. Both reactions are valid. The 8.71% rule is a guideline, not a law of physics. It is a useful way to estimate your break-even point, but it does have limitations, and I want to be honest about those. The first limitation is human behavior. The rule assumes that if you do not buy a home, you will take your would-be down payment and invest it perfectly in the stock market year after year without panicking, without skipping months, and without rating that money to buy a car or go on vacation. But we all know that this is not how most people behave. We all have moments where we say, I probably should not spend $7 on this fancy latte, and then we buy it anyway. We are human. We get emotional, we get impulsive, and we do not always optimize every dollar. So yes, there is an opportunity cost to putting $100,000 into a house instead of the stock market. But there is also a very real chance that if you did not put it into the house, you would not invest it perfectly either. That is why many people say that a mortgage is like forced savings. Every month, part of your mortgage payment goes toward building equity, whether you are in the mood to save or not. For a lot of people, that structure, that forced commitment is the only reason they ever build meaningful wealth. The second limitation is how mortgages actually work. In this video, we simplify the interest cost by taking the loan amount and multiplying it by the interest rate to get an approximate yearly number. But in real life, mortgages run on something called an amortization schedule. At the beginning of your mortgage, most of your payment goes toward interest, and only a small portion goes toward principal. Over time, slowly, that starts to flip. Toward the end of a 30-year mortgage, most of your payment is going toward principal, and only a small piece is interest. So the cost of debt is not constant across the duration of the loan. It is front-loaded. On top of that, not everyone has a 30-year fixed mortgage. Some people have shorter terms, like 15 years. Others have adjustable or variable rate mortgages that change over time. All of these details can dramatically change the true cost of debt. By the time you get to the end of a 30-year mortgage, the interest portion has mostly evaporated, and you own a home that may have appreciated significantly. The 8.71% rule does not capture that long-term shift perfectly. It is a snapshot, not a full movie. The third limitation is that the rule assumes that conditions stay the same. But in the real world, things move. Inflation can spike for a few years, like we have seen recently. Mortgage rates can double from one cycle to the next. Stock market returns can be higher or lower than the historical average. Real estate in your city might boom while another region stays flat. Because of that, this rule is not a prophecy, it is a starting point. That is also why having a calculator where you can change the inputs is so helpful. You can update it as the world changes, instead of relying on one fixed percentage forever. The fourth thing we did not fully factor in is tax benefits. If you live in the United States, you may be able to deduct your mortgage interest against your income if you itemize your deductions and if your deductible expenses are higher than the standard deduction. The standard deduction for individuals sits somewhere in the low tens of thousands of dollars per year, around the $13,000 to $14,000 range, depending on the exact tax year and your filing status. If your mortgage interest plus other deductible expenses do not exceed that amount, the interest deduction does not help you much. But if you have a large mortgage and your interest payments are high, the ability to deduct that interest can effectively lower your true after-tax cost of borrowing. The problem is, the impact of this varies wildly depending on your income, your tax bracket, your loan amount, your interest rate, and your country's tax rules. So I cannot give you a one-size-fits-all adjustment here. You would need to run those numbers yourself, or talk with a tax professional. Now, let us zoom out and talk about the non-mathematical pros of owning a home. First, owning a home with a fixed-rate mortgage gives you predictable payments. Your principal and interest stay roughly the same over the life of the loan. That means you can plan around that number years in advance. When you rent, your landlord can raise the rent, sell the property, or decide not to renew your lease at all. There is less control. Second, when you own, you have full control over the space. Want to paint the walls black? Go for it. Want to knock down a wall? Change the kitchen? Build a deck? You do not need permission from a landlord. That level of control and permanence is emotionally satisfying for a lot of people. Third, owning a home gives you long-term security. No one can decide to sell the house and ask you to move. As long as you pay your mortgage and your property taxes, you are in control. Fourth, inflation actually works in your favor when you have a fixed mortgage. Your payment is locked in nominally, but over time, the value of each dollar falls. In other words, you are paying your old fixed mortgage with cheaper future dollars. Here's an exaggerated example. Imagine, just for fun, that a 50-year fixed mortgage existed and you locked in a $300 monthly payment 50 years ago. Back then, $300 a month might have felt like a heavy payment. Today, $300 a month feels tiny compared to typical rents or mortgage payments. Even though 50-year mortgages are not really a thing, the same principle applies on a smaller scale with a normal 30-year mortgage. Finally, there is the potential for capital appreciation. Not every property booms, but some absolutely do. For example, there was a home in my area that sold for about $599,000 in the mid-1990s. That same property sold recently for around $3.23 million. That is more than tripling in value and far exceeds the average appreciation of homes in the country over that period. And beyond all the math, there is something intangible about owning your own home. For many people, it is deeply fulfilling. It is about having a place that is truly theirs, a place to raise a family, to customize, and eventually to retire in. The peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a paid-off home later in life does not always show up neatly in spreadsheets, but it matters. Now, I also want to be fair and talk about the advantages of renting, because they're real ones. The biggest advantage is flexibility. If you are renting and you decide that you hate your city, your job, or your neighbors, it is relatively easy to leave. Once your lease is up, you can move across town, across the country, or across the world. You are not tied to a 30-year commitment or to the health of one local housing market. Second, renters do not have to deal with property taxes or maintenance. When the roof leaks, you call the landlord. When the boiler breaks, you call the landlord. When the property tax bill arrives, it goes to the owner, not to you. Yes, your rent might indirectly reflect some of those costs, but you are not the one stressing about surprise $5,000 repairs. Third, renting often gives you access to amenities that many homeowners do not have. In big cities especially, apartment buildings may have doormen, secure entry, gyms, pools, rooftop spaces, barbecue areas, lounges, co-working spots, and more. To build or maintain that as a homeowner would be extremely expensive. With renting, you pay your rent, maybe a small renter's insurance policy, and you are done. Life is simpler. So, what is the big takeaway? The biggest takeaway is that you cannot rely on rules of thumb alone. You need to run your own numbers for your own city, your own income, and your own time horizon. The 8.71% rule is a powerful shortcut. It lets you take a home price, convert it into a realistic monthly ownership cost, and then compare that to the rent for a similar place. Right now, with mortgage rates as high as they are in many parts of the United States and around the world, renting often looks more attractive in the short term. Especially if you are unsure how long you will stay, or you may want to move within a few years, renting can give you flexibility and lower risk. However, if you plan to stay in one place for at least 5 to 8 years, and you are buying a home that is fairly priced relative to incomes and rents in your area, buying has the potential to deliver significant upside over the long term, both financially and emotionally. So, use the rule, play with the calculator, adjust the inputs, and then decide, for your situation, right now, are you better off renting or buying? If you found this breakdown helpful, consider subscribing, check out the next video I have lined up for you, and let me know in the comments where you stand in this debate. Are you currently team rent or team buy a home? I will see you in the next one.